In WoW, every playable race or allied race has at least 3 unique abilities specific to their own race. We won't be looking at racial abilities that help the player escape roots or stun effects or other DPS abilities, since they could appear in another video entirely on its own. So in this list, we'll just go over abilities that help you move faster in some way. And at number 10, we have the Worgen racial ability named Running Wild. This ability was added in Cataclysm and allows a Worgen to drop on all 4s and run faster. By doing this, the Worgen player can gain an increased movement speed up to 100%. Players learn Running Wild at level 10 when riding becomes available. While Running Wild may appear to be more akin to a druid's travel form, it actually functions as a mount, which is more of a curse than a blessing. Since it is not a travel form, being able to ride a Worgen while it's in its Running Wild stance is unfortunately not possible, but it would be very cool if it was. Running Wild is so low on this list because it has several drawbacks. First, Running Wild is not an instant cast and requires a 1.5 second cast time. This is probably because 1.5 seconds is the universal required time to mount up, but it still sucks it cannot be used instantly. Like any other mount, Running Wild has an indefinite duration until it's canceled by the player or until they're dismounted. Since it is technically a mount, Running Wild can neither be used in dungeons, raids, or indoor zones, where mounts are not allowed, nor can it be used in combat. Unfortunately, Running Wild is mostly useless at max level, since most mounts will give a faster mount speed than Running Wild would. Running Wild will always have an increased mount speed of 100%, unaffected by things like most mount speed auras, mount equipments, and Pathfinder achievement speed boosts. All the while, the expert riding skill gives a flying mount speed 310%. This means that using Running Wild with maximum riding skill means it will always be more than a third slower than any flying mount. Running Wild did have one noticeable usefulness at max level, which is that it could be used in the Maw before ground mounts were allowed, which gave Worgen players a significant advantage over other players while in the zone. And at number 9, we have a racial ability of the Night Elf called Wisp Spirit. This is a Night Elf ability that allows players to turn into a wisp upon death and increase their movement speed by 75%. This racial has been around since Vanilla, where in Vanilla it was a 50% speed increase, but this was changed to 75% in Wrath of the Lich King. Some players in the WoW community disparagingly refer to the racial ability as improved death, mocking Night Elves for having a racial ability that is only useful after dying, rather than something that is useful to prevent them from dying in the first place. The ability is situationally useful, however, and unlike many other racial abilities, benefits all classes. If a player wishes to see what a wisp form looks like, they can gain the toy Wisp Amulet from recovering Night Elf archaeology fragments. This toy allows the player to take on the appearance of a wisp for 20 seconds and has a 10-minute cooldown. Unfortunately, it does not provide the speed buff, and any damage taken will cancel the effect. The lore on the archaeology panel in-game states, wisps are nature spirits thought to be dead Night Elves. They exist in tight connection with the forest homeland and Night Elves in general, performing such beneficial activities as construction, repair, and defense of elven communities. Many wisps sacrifice themselves in order to defeat Archimonde at the end of the Third War, and again sacrificing themselves to defend Darkshore from the Horde, and again when the burning of Teldrassil killed countless Night Elves, who would have become wisps, if not for Elune trying to send them to Ardenwald to assist, ending with them in the Maw, to only be recovered and joined within the new seat of Elune, so there are fewer wisps today than there once were for countless reasons. This ability is listed at number 9 because it is only useful while dead, and a lot of the gameplay in WoW focuses on not dying. However, Wisp Spirit certainly makes corpse runs much faster and easier, and can be great for classes that have no resurrection or healing abilities, like warriors. That being said, the uses of Wisp form are still fairly niche, and only applicable to the player for a small amount of time. This is thus more of a gimmicky racial ability, but nevertheless it is still one that can be extremely handy. And at number 8, we have the Mag'har Orc racial ability named Open Skies, which increases a Mag'har Orc's mounted speed by 10%. This is a passive ability that was added in BFA with the introduction of the Mag'har Orc allied race. Open Skies is a very useful when doing open world content such as World Quest or flying to rares. Unfortunately, this ability does not stack with other speed buffs, with 2 exceptions. The only exceptions we could find are the guild perk Mount Up and the Death Knight ability on a Pale Horse. This means with the maximum flying speed increase of 310%, Mag'har Arcs can go at least 320% speed. Additionally, Open Skies also works in battlegrounds and arenas, whereas other mounted speed buffs do not work. 10% extra speed may not seem like a lot, but it does add up quite quickly over distance and time. Imagine how much extra time even a little speed boost would save a player when they're traveling around Azeroth or other worlds to collect candy buckets during Hollow's End, or lighting fires during the Midsummer Fire Festival. Or, of course, crossing continents for world quests and dailies 10% faster. Open Skies has few active uses, but it does have a slight impact on gameplay and makes flying to other places a little bit easier, so it lands at number 8 on this list. And at number 7, we have the Void Elf racial ability named Spatial Rift. This ability functions somewhat similarly to the Venthyr's Door of Shadows, a mage's blink ability, a bleat in much slower form, or more like the Warlock's Demonic Circle, but placed in a very different form, and only lasting 5 seconds instead of 15 minutes. The player first activates Spatial Rift to send out a bolt of void energy up to 30 yards in front of them. Activating Spatial Rift again will teleport the player to where the void portal currently is, but the player must do so within 5 seconds of the initial cast. Spatial Rift was added to WoW and Legion, specifically in patch 7.3.5, alongside the launch of the Void Elf allied race with the BFA pre-purchase. Spatial Rift has a handful of problems, with the most obvious being that a player can usually just walk faster than it, which certainly sucks a lot of the usefulness out of the ability. However, not all is lost, as it can sometimes be very handy in PvP situations, like quickly carrying a flag across Warsong Gulch while slowed. It can also be used in Mythic Plus to skip some trash packs, as long as your allies also have a way to skip by them. Aside from those two reasons, its uses are few since it has so many drawbacks. Pair that with the fact that it has a 3-minute cooldown, this ability is very limited in its use. If you cast it and don't activate it within 5 seconds, if you step too far away from it, if it hits a wall or a random tiny object on the ground, or if you cast it with your back to the wall, it is wasted, and you gotta wait another 3 minutes to try it again. And at number 6, we have the Night Elf ability, Elusiveness. Elusiveness is a passive Night Elf racial ability that slightly increases a rogue or druid's movement speed by 5% while using stealth or prowl. And no, for obvious reasons, this does not work with Shadow Meld, as you can't move while Shadow Melding. So it only affects rogues, stealth/vanish, and druids PAL. Elusiveness was added in Wrath, and its original iteration reduced the chance that enemies could detect Night Elves while they were Shadow Meld or stealth. In Cataclysm, Elusiveness was changed so that it reduced the chance to be detected by enemies, only applied to Shadow Meld, and enemy reduction notice was removed from affecting stealth entirely. To compensate, Elusiveness was changed so that it also increased movement speed by 5%, while a Night Elf rogue or druid was in stealth. In Legion, Elusiveness was changed so the reduction in enemies being able to notice a player no longer worked with Shadow Meld. Because Elusiveness is so niche and requires a player to be both a Night Elf and a rogue or druid, this speed boost only affects a very small number of players, and isn't very high on this list for that reason. However, it is especially great in PvP, where rogues and druids spend a lot of time in stealth, and this 5% speed boost can change the game. Or if you're a rogue doing pickpocketing runs, this is also very useful. And at number 5, we have a racial ability for the Dark Iron Dwarves called Dungeon Delver. This is a passive racial ability that allows all Dark Iron Dwarves to move 4% faster while indoors. Since it applies to anywhere indoors, Dungeon Delver can also be used to move slightly faster through many places in both Azeroth and beyond. Dungeon Delver also stacks with other speed abilities like speed potions, which is indeed very handy. For example, a Dark Iron Dwarf Shaman in Ghost Wolf form can move at 34% speed rather than just 30% with the baseline Ghost Wolf ability. The Dungeon Delver ability was added in BFA in patch 8.0, when the Dark Iron allied race became available for Alliance players and their counterparts, the Mag'har Orc, became available to Horde players. Dungeon Delver has so far remained the same since then, with no plans to change it, although 4% does seem rather an odd choice compared to a nice 5%. The lore behind this ability is pretty simple. Dark Iron Dwarves founded and live in the city of Shadowforge, which is in the dungeon Blackrock depths. Given the long time Dark Iron Dwarves have lived far underground, it makes sense that they would have adapted to be able to easily maneuver in dark and twisted passages. While not the most impressive of movement speed abilities, Dungeon Delver still is a movement speed buff, and can be very helpful in any dungeon or raid, as most are considered indoors. Dungeon Delver's impact is usually small, but it can still make a difference in some situations, such as Mythic Plus, although rarely for PvP, as most PvP scenarios are considered outside, so it definitely deserves a spot on this list. And at number 4, we have the Zandalari racial Embrace the Loa. There are 6 Loas that Zandalari can pray to and receive their blessings, each given a different buff, each based on the specific Loa, but for this entry we're focusing on Embrace of Gonk, which increases your movement speed by 5%. The Shrine of Gonk is located in the middle of Dazara lore besides the Paku Shrine. After the player has given an offer to Gonk, they gain the passive ability Embrace of Gonk. The Embrace of Gonk does stack with other speed movement buffs, like the previously mentioned Ghost Wolf form and some of the Druid shapeshifting forms. There are several downsides to this ability. First, Embrace of Gonk does not apply to mounted speed. Second, Zandalari players can only change their Loa and thus their Loa's Embrace only once every 5 days, which is one of the longest player ability cooldowns in the entire game. This means Embrace of Gonk comes at the price of not being able to have one of the other 5 passive abilities which the other Loas can grant the Zandalari players. By choosing the Embrace of Gonk and its 5% movement speed, players forsake Akunda's chance to heal extra while using healing spells, Bwomsamdi's occasional DPS and healing buff, Kimball's chance to cause a bleed effect, Kragwa's chance to grant health and armor, and Paku's chance to grant critical strike. Embrace of Gonk is one of the best movement speed racials in the entire game and can be quite handy for running old raids, especially when combined with another Zandalari racial, City of Gold, which increases all gold found by 2%. This racial is pretty much right out better than Dark-Eyed Dwarves, simply by the fact that it's 1% faster, and you can pick and choose whichever one you want. And at number 3 on this list, we have Rocket Jump, which is a Goblin racial ability. Originally introduced in Cataclysm, this ability allows the player to jump forward several yards, a reverse version of the Hunter's Disengage ability. In Cataclysm, the ability had a 2-minute cooldown, but this was changed to 90 seconds in patch 6.2. Rocket Jump works very similar to a Demon Hunter's Double Jump, as it grants the player the ability to jump twice as high as a forward direction. Rocket Jump can also be thought of as somewhat similar to a Mage's Blink ability. The ability to teleport or jump forward can situationally be useful, but certainly not all the time. According to the tooltip for the ability, the rockets activate from the Goblin's belt, giving rise to some players calling this ability butt rockets. Rocket Jump can also be used to mitigate fall damage, if the player uses it in the air right before they land, exactly like a Hunter's Disengage, Warrior's Heroic Leap, Rogue's Grappling Hook, or even a well-timed Mage Blink. Other than sharing a cooldown with another Goblin racial ability named Rocket Barrage, which is a DPS ability, there really is no downside to Rocket Jump, and it's one of the best mobility abilities in the game, let alone just racial abilities. It can be used in nearly all gameplay aspects of WoW, and is sometimes incorporated into a Goblin's player's rotation abilities, since it can also be somewhat useful. It was especially useful for the mythic version of the Kil'jaeden fight in Tomb of Sargeras, as it was seen as required because of the obscene amount of knockback abilities that were in the fight. And this Rocket Jump made the fight much easier, and because of this, it was a bit of an outrage, as all of the world first guilds were basically forced to race change and even faction change to as many goblins as possible. For all these reasons and more, Rocket Jump quite literally lands at number 3 on this list. And at number 2, we have the Highmountain Tauren racial ability Bull Rush. This ability allows the player to rush forward at 200% speed for 1 second and stuns any enemies in their path for 1.5 seconds. Bull Rush is somewhat functionally similar to a Monk's Flying Serpent Kick. 200% speed may not sound like much, but that is an incredible ground speed buff, and can easily send the player 20 to 30 yards forwards. This speed is roughly 2/3 the maximum flying speed, which is 310%. This makes Bull Rush a great racial mobility ability, which also has a pretty low cooldown of only 2 minutes. Bull Rush has remained unchanged since it was added in the Legion patch 7.3.5, along with the Highmountain Tauren allied race. There are 2 drawbacks to Bull Rush. First, Bull Rush is not stackable with most other speed effects, like for example a Druid's Dash ability or a Speed Potion. While it would be fun to go full Sonic, at least this restriction makes some sense from a gameplay perspective. However, Bull Rush does work with most Druid shapeshifting forms and a Shaman's Ghostwolf passive speed increase. The only Druid form Bull Rush does not work with is Travel form, which already is as fast as a mount. The second drawback to Bull Rush is that there is no way to stop it or change direction once it's in motion, and does not stop at world edges. This means it can be very easy to Bull Rush over a cliff edge or die to fall damage if the player is not careful enough. And finally, at number 1, we have another Worgen racial ability named Darkflight. This ability allows a Worgen player to increase their movement speed by 40% for 10 seconds. Added in Cataclysm, this ability started out with a 3-minute cooldown, but was changed to 2 minutes shortly after it was introduced. Upon using this ability, Worgen players gain a speed boost, one that won't even break a player's stealth or a Druid's form. This means it has a huge benefit to Worgen rogues and Druids with their passive speed boosts. Darkflight has a separate cooldown from other speed abilities, meaning it can be used right after or before a rogue sprint or a Druid's dash to keep them moving. Unfortunately, Darkflight does not stack with either dash or sprint for extra zoomy action, but it does make Worgen the fastest of the fast Druids and rogues you can find. Darkflight can be quite situationally useful, and its main appeal lies in being able to sustain long bursts of speed. Darkflight does stack with several other speed abilities, such as a Druid's Travel form or Speed Potions. Darkflight is also useful when running away from players in PvP, or even giving chase to them, or it can be useful for escaping after pulling too many mobs, or to quickly run across a boss room to escape mechanics. Because Darkflight is so versatile and can be used in combination with class abilities to extreme effect, it deserves to be our number 1 spot for the best racial mobility ability. Alright, and that's the video. Are there any other racial mobility abilities that we may have missed, or have ideas for future videos similar to this one? If so, let us know down in the comments.